They handed me a name tag. Not mother of the groom. Not even Vesper Helenworth thing. Just one word, all caps, centered on a sticker with no gold trim like the others. Afterthought. I stood there in my blue lace gown, holding it between two fingers like it might burn me. Behind me, someone popped a champagne cork. Laughter burst like fireworks. I am Vesper Helen Worthing, 65, widowed, and yesterday I was an afterthought at my only son's wedding. Today, I own the penthouse he thought was his future. 36 missed calls still blinking on my phone screen. I haven't returned a single one. The venue was lavish, the kind where chandeliers drip crystal like rain and centerpieces have their own floral designer. I arrived 10 minutes early, never one for fashionable lateness. But as I stepped into the marble lobby and saw the seating chart, I already knew. No Helen Worth thing listed among the reserved family rows. Just this sticker, peeled off a sheet, slapped into my hand. The young girl at check-in didn't even meet my eyes when she gave it to me, just smiled and said, "Enjoy the evening," like I was a donor, not the mother of the groom. I tucked the sticker into my clutch. I would not be wearing that. No one greeted me. Not Emily, my new daughter-in-law, not her mother. Certainly not my son, Christopher. He was across the ballroom laughing, pouring drinks, adjusting a boutonniere that I didn't pin. There was a gift table stacked like a pyramid. Gold-ribboned boxes. Envelopes with checks fat enough to make the legs wobble. I walked over and placed my gift down gently. A white box. Inside a silver ribbon. And beneath it, the deed to a $25 million penthouse overlooking the city skyline. He never knew it was mine to give. Christopher once called it the next chapter, said he and Emily were ready to build their legacy. He didn't know I already held the pen. I looked at the placards near the dining hall. Emily's grandparents, reserved. The Freeman family attorney, reserved. Florist, photographer, makeup artist, all listed. My name wasn't among them. I stood still for a moment, watching the waiter pour rosé into crystal glasses. One woman walked past me and said, "Excuse me, are you with catering?" I didn't correct her. A man nearby, maybe Emily's uncle, laughed and pointed toward the gift table. Some joker put Afterthought as their name. Can you imagine? His wife giggled. That's cold. I left before the first toast, didn't wait for cake, didn't smile for the family portrait. My feet carried me out the side entrance, past a waiter holding a tray of mini crab cakes. Outside, the night air felt honest. The irony, he'd thanked me a week ago for staying out of the way, said it would mean a lot to Emily's parents if I kept things drama-free. They printed Afterthought on my name tag. They smiled. I just left quietly. I looked down at my phone again. 36 missed calls from Christopher, from Emily, from numbers I didn't recognize. I wasn't going to answer, not yet, because sometimes silence is the only voice they hear. And sometimes the only seat you need at the table is the one you build for yourself. The first time I met Emily, she looked around my living room like it smelled of mothballs and forgotten dreams. She didn't say anything outright. She didn't have to. Her eyes did all the speaking. She took in the floral print sofa that Harold and I bought the year Christopher was born. The same sofa where he took his first steps. The worn armrest where I used to balance a bottle while holding him with one hand and folding laundry with the other. Emily's eyes landed on the crocheted coasters, the ones I made during chemo. I offered her tea. She smiled tightly and said, "Oh, I'm more of a latte girl." I told her I didn't have a machine for that. She said, "No worries. It's kind of charming in here, like a thrift store with sentiment." Christopher cleared his throat. "Emily's just used to more modern interiors," he said, as if translating. I nodded. She didn't sit down until he did. That day was the first time I realized I was being gently erased. Not violently, not rudely, just sanded down. A few weeks later, they invited me to dinner at her parents' place. I brought my lemon bundt cake, the one Christopher used to beg for on his birthdays. It sat untouched beside the tiramisu from the caterer. Her mother offered me mineral water with lemon, then told me all about their planned renovations for the starter penthouse. Starter, as if a 2,700 square foot condo on 44th Street was an appetizer. They talked about open shelving, quartz countertops, and gutting the built-ins that Harold designed himself. My fingers curled into my napkin. Emily leaned in at one point, smiling at me with all teeth and no warmth. I'm sure you understand, Helen. It's just we want to make it feel like us, you know? Us. Christopher never once looked up from his phone. He didn't even glance at me when I said, "Of course, it's just a space." A lie. But I've learned to survive on lies you tell with grace. I think the moment it all crystallized was one Sunday morning when I brought over a box of old photographs. I thought they might want to include some in the wedding. Maybe display a photo of baby Christopher in the bathtub, him in Harold's arms at the beach, one of the three of us in matching Christmas pajamas. Emily flipped through them, humming. Then she paused, held one up and said, "This isn't the aesthetic we're going for, but maybe a few for the memory table at the back. The back, where people might stop while getting coffee, or not at all." She handed the box back to me and said, "We're trying to keep the vibe light." I said nothing. I packed the photos back into their sleeves. Christopher stood beside her, arms crossed, unreadable. I waited for him to say something. Instead, he walked me to the elevator and said quietly, "Mom, can you just try to be pleasant?" Pleasant, as if I'd made a scene, as if being invisible wasn't already the most pleasant thing I could be. Back home, I sat on my front porch with the photos spread across my lap. I looked down at one, me, young, sunburned, smiling, holding Christopher at the lake. No makeup, no filters, just joy. I whispered to the wind, "I am trying." 2 days before the rehearsal dinner, Christopher called. "I need to ask you something," he said. My heart lifted. Maybe an apology. Maybe he noticed. "Can you not bring up Dad during the speeches? It's just Emily never met him, and her parents are kind of sensitive about that stuff. We just want to keep things focused on us, the future." My throat tightened. I managed. "So, no mention of the man who raised you? Who saved every cent to buy that penthouse you're moving into?" A pause. "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be." I hung up the phone without another word, walked to the kitchen, pulled out the recipe card for lemon bundt cake. I didn't bake it. I just stood there, staring at Harold's handwriting on the back. "Add extra zest if she's had a bad week. Love, H." I folded the card back into the drawer, and that night, I opened the safe behind the linen closet. Inside was the original deed, the transfer forms, the amendment Harold signed 2 months before he passed, giving me full control. He'd said, "In case they forget, Vess, I know you won't." I hadn't. So when Christopher told me, "Mom, don't stir things up," I smiled because I knew what he didn't. The waters had already been stirred. All I had to do was let the tide roll in. They didn't invite me to the cake tasting. I found out when I bumped into Lydia, an old friend from church. She asked how the red velvet turned out, said she never imagined Emily would pick something so bold. I smiled and nodded as if I'd been there. I hadn't even known they'd scheduled one. Later that week, I scrolled through photos on Emily's Instagram. There she was, seated beside her mother and two bridesmaids, laughing behind white fondant samples shaped like peonies. Christopher stood in the background, distracted, holding a tasting spoon. I noticed something else: 3 champagne glasses on the table. One for Emily, one for her mom, one for her sister. None for me. The florist meeting, same story. I'd always imagined picking flowers with my future daughter-in-law, showing her the pressed lilacs from my wedding album, telling her how Harold had written a note under each bloom in the bouquet, like a secret scavenger hunt. But I never got the chance. When I asked Christopher if he needed help choosing arrangements, he paused and said, "Emily's aunt is sort of taking the reins on that." I said, "Of course, I understand." Another lie wrapped in politeness. Still, I tried to stay present in small ways, supportive, quiet, hopeful. A week before the engagement party, I mailed them a gift: a delicate silver frame, hand-engraved with their initials and the wedding date. Inside it, I placed a black and white photo of Harold holding baby Christopher, both of them wrapped in a towel on the front porch. The caption beneath it read, "Love that lasts, chooses quietly every day." It came back 2 days later, the box unopened. Taped to the lid was a Post-it note. Neat, precise handwriting. Emily's. "We already have enough frames, but thank you for the thought." No salutation, no signature. just that. I sat on my bed holding the note. My hands didn't shake. They didn't need to. Some pain comes not like a storm, but like cold settling in your bones. Familiar. Expected. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked to the hallway closet, opened the small wooden box where I kept our wedding album, and slid the yellow post-it inside, right between pages 16 and 17, where my own mother had written me a letter before she passed. That note joined the archive of silences I've endured. They never asked about the gift again. Christopher didn't call. But that night, as I poured myself a cup of tea, I let my eyes rest on the manila folder tucked into the bottom drawer of my desk. I hadn't touched it in months, not since the transfer had been finalized. Most people don't know this, but back when Harold was still healthy, we bought shares in a high-rise project downtown, a quiet investment in what used to be an abandoned printing press. He'd said, "Vess, in 10 years, this will be the future skyline." He was right. What no one knew, not even Christopher, was that when Harold died, he'd left me full decision-making rights on our portion of the development. And when the last penthouse was released, Unit 4403, 3,200 square feet of glass, marble, and sky, I'd claimed it under our investment trust. It wasn't under my name, it was under the trusts, which I controlled entirely. Emily and Christopher thought they were moving in as new owners. They weren't. They were tenants, and they didn't even know it. I never mentioned it, never threw it in their faces. I wanted them to be happy, to build something of their own. But each time I was left out, each time I was erased a little more, I found myself imagining the sound of the front door to that penthouse clicking shut behind me. Alone, quiet, mine. There was one more moment, small, forgettable to anyone else. But it stayed with me. It was the night of the rehearsal dinner. They didn't ask me to speak, didn't ask me to light a candle, didn't even assign me a seat at the head table. Instead, I was placed near the back, between Emily's college roommate and a second cousin who couldn't remember my name. When I excused myself early, no one noticed. I stood outside the venue under the string lights, holding my purse, watching couples laugh and clink glasses through the window. I pressed the car key in my coat pocket. My hand brushed against something, the post-it, still in there. I unfolded it, read it again. "We already have enough, but thank you." I smiled because that night, for the first time, I believed it. They did have enough. Of noise, of flash, of appearances. But what they didn't have was foresight, or gratitude, or the deed to Unit 4403. The ballroom shimmered. Crystal chandeliers hummed above us, reflecting off walls lined in ivory and gold. Each table sparkled under tall centerpieces of orchids, roses, and what must have been $800 worth of eucalyptus. Waiters floated like ghosts, silent, white-gloved, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres that sounded more like French poems than food. Everything was perfect. Everything except me. I had no place card. I wandered for a few minutes, feigning distraction, pretending to check my phone, smiling politely at strangers. Finally, I asked one of the ushers, a young man barely old enough to rent a car, where I was seated. He checked the list, double-checked, then whispered something to a woman in a headset. She smiled too tightly. "Oh yes, table 19, she said. "Just there, near the restroom entrance." She pointed to the far corner, near the swinging doors next to the coat check. I sat in silence. My seat wobbled slightly, one leg uneven on the marble. I folded my hands in my lap and watched. From a distance, Christopher looked happy, radiant even. Emily held his arm like a trophy. Her dress sparkled with hand-stitched beads, her smile wider than I'd ever seen. They stood under an arch of peonies, receiving congratulations from Emily's aunts, her father's colleagues, her Pilates instructor. No one came to my table. No waiter offered me a refill. No photographer pointed a lens in my direction. Not even a nod from Christopher. At one point, Emily's grandmother glanced my way. She squinted, turned to the woman beside her, and asked loudly, "Who is that?" I held the corner of my napkin between my fingers, folded it once, then again. Tiny, neat squares, like folding away my pride. The music shifted, the first dance, the lights dimmed, and all eyes turned to the couple as they stepped onto the floor. I stood up slightly, just enough to see past the orchid arrangements that towered over my table. Christopher held Emily close, whispering something that made her throw her head back and laugh. And in that moment, with the music swelling, the crowd swaying, and joy blooming like confetti, he never once looked for me. A young server passed by with a tray of crystal flutes. He hesitated at my table, then leaned in. "Ma'am," he asked gently, "are you with catering? I think someone said this seat was for staff." I blinked, then looked down and saw it. That name tag still clipped to the program booklet in my lap, the one Emily's cousin had handed me at check-in without making eye contact. I hadn't read it before. I had assumed it said Mother of the Groom, or maybe just my name, but it didn't. Printed in small serif font, bold, unmistakable, was the word afterthought. I didn't cry. Not then, not even later. I reached for it slowly, 2 fingers as if lifting something delicate, sacred. I turned it over in my palm, felt the weight of that word. A pause, not in the room, but inside me. That kind of silence, where your breath catches in your throat before your mind catches up. No fireworks, no screaming, no dramatic gasp, just stillness, and then movement. Mine. I unclipped the tag, slipped it into my clutch, and stood. No coat, no goodbye, no scene. Only one sentence in my head, spoken not out loud but inward, like prayer. I don't need a toast. I just need the right name. I walked toward the exit, past mirrored pillars, past tables blooming with laughter. No one noticed. No one stopped me until one voice, a child's. "Grandma?" Lily, my granddaughter, 7, wearing a dress with little sunflowers, her curls bouncing as she ran to catch up. "Are you leaving?" she asked. I knelt to meet her eyes. "I'll see you soon, my darling," I whispered, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, and then because I wanted her to remember, I placed a kiss on her forehead and said, "Always know where your seat is, and if they don't offer you one, make your own table." Outside, I called Ava. No need for pleasantries. She answered on the second ring. "It's time," I said. She didn't ask why. She already knew. By the time I reached the sidewalk, the bank notification had arrived. I turned off my phone, slipped it into my clutch beside the afterthought tag. Then I walked, one heel after the other, into the night, not alone, but with dignity trailing behind me like a veil. I didn't take the main exit. Instead, I slipped quietly into the hallway near the kitchen, then past the service doors until I found the back stairs that led to the wine cellar. The staff at the Langston estate had always been discreet. They nodded at me like I still belonged there, because technically, I did. The air grew cooler as I descended. Marble gave way to limestone, and by the time I reached the cellar, my hands had stopped shaking. I pulled out my phone, one missed call, 36 texts unread, none of them from Christopher. I scrolled to Ava Whitmore, tapped. She picked up before the second ring. "Mrs. Worth thing." I took a breath. "Ava," I said, "it's time." She didn't ask why, just silence on her end, and then the sound of keys clicking. Professional, precise. That's what I paid her for. "Full execution?" she asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Pull the trigger. Now." Let me explain. The penthouse was never truly theirs. It was a promise made by Emily's family, one of many flashy gestures during their engagement. "We're gifting them the top floor at the Langston," her father had said to me once at a dinner I hadn't wanted to attend. "View of the whole skyline. Our wedding gift." As if they owned it. What he didn't know, or perhaps forgot, was that I held majority shares in the Langston Development Group. The entire tower bore the Langston name, yes, but it was my late husband's land, my strategic investments, and my quiet decisions that allowed it to rise. When Harold died, the board assumed I'd step down. I didn't. Instead, I bought out 2 minor partners. Not loudly, not quickly, just persistently. By the end of that fiscal year, I controlled 62% of Langston's residential assets, including Unit 4403, the penthouse with 3 terraces, Italian marble, and Emily's Pinterest mood boards all over the design plans. They never asked me, not for approval, not for insight, not even for access. They simply assumed. Assumed I'd fade, assumed I'd sign, assumed, like so many others, that silence meant absence. It didn't. It meant I was watching, documenting, waiting. I could hear the faint thump of bass from the wedding floor above me. Laughter. A toast, maybe. Ava returned to the line. All authorization docs confirmed. Would you like to electronically sign or… I already did. Tuesday, remember? A pause. Of course. I just pressed send. The transfer will reflect within the hour. Send a copy to the escrow officer and blind copy their wedding planner. Yes, ma'am. I sat down on the edge of a wooden crate labeled Petrus, 1982. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was just done. Done trying to win smiles that never came. Done offering explanations that fell on curated ears. Done playing the quiet ghost in their perfect little tableau. I reached into my clutch, pulled out the name tag, read it again. Afterthought. Not mother of the groom. Not Vesper Helen Worth thing. Not even Helen. Just an insult hidden in calligraphy. I held the tag in one hand, my phone in the other. Then I whispered, more to myself than to Ava, if you label me incorrectly, I'll just fix the paperwork. And I meant it. They could pretend I wasn't at the tasting, at the venue walkthrough, at the flower trials, but they couldn't pretend I didn't exist on the deed. Because now, I was the deed. As I stood to leave the cellar, I took one last look around. Harold had proposed to me just upstairs in that same wine room, 40 years ago, after a winter gala. He hadn't had a ring yet, just a folded napkin with our initials scribbled in red lipstick. Promise me, he'd said, you'll always know your worth, even when others don't. I nodded to the memory, to him, to the version of me he believed in, even when I didn't. Back upstairs, no one noticed me slip through the lobby. The valet barely looked up, but when I gave him my claim ticket, he smiled. Leaving so soon, ma'am? I just smiled back and said, better to leave as myself than stay as someone else's mistake. I woke up to the soft morning light pouring in through the bay window. For a moment, everything was quiet. No clinking champagne glasses, no whispered judgments behind manicured smiles. Just birdsong and the blinking red light on my phone. I didn't rush to check it. I walked to the kitchen first, boiled water, and steeped a single bag of Earl Grey in my favorite chipped porcelain mug, the one with the tiny crack shaped like a crescent moon. Only after I took my first sip did I pick up the phone. 36 missed calls, 5 from Christopher, 4 from a number I didn't recognize, probably Emily's mother. The rest were scattered, the wedding planner, the family liaison, even one from someone saved in my contacts as "do not answer." No voicemails, no texts explaining, just ringing into silence. I took another sip of tea, then placed the phone face down. It wasn't the calls that stirred me. It was what Ava had said just minutes before. Congratulations, it's official. You're now the sole registered owner of Unit 4403 Langston Tower. The deed is updated and filed. She paused. You also asked me to blind copy the wedding planner. I did, I said, and the bride's family attorney. I could hear the faint click of her keyboard. Both copies delivered, time-stamped. No one can claim they didn't know. Thank you. Then she said something I didn't expect. Do you want silence or do you want closure? I didn't answer right away. She wasn't talking about paperwork. She was asking about the thing that lives under everything, the ache. But I'd learned something in the last 24 hours. Closure is overrated when you have peace. And silence, well, sometimes silence is the closure. There was an envelope waiting on my hallway console, hand-delivered. Inside, one single brass key, the kind that unlocks a private elevator, the kind that isn't given lightly, and a note printed on Langston letterhead. For your records, Mrs. Worthing, the penthouse belongs solely to you. All prior decorating appointments have been canceled at your request. Kindly let us know when you'd like the space prepared. I held the key between my fingers, feeling its weight. It was warm, not because of the metal, but because I remembered how they used to hand me the spare key. Just in case, they'd say. Not the main one. Not the one they gave to the decorator or the concierge. Just the extra. The afterthought. Now I had the only copy. I set it down on the dining table next to a linen napkin embroidered with my initials. No post-its this time. No calligraphy lies. No polite erasures of who I was. Just my name on my deed next to my key. My phone buzzed again. Call number 37. Emily. I let it ring, then ring again, and die. There's something I wish people understood. Silence is not absence. Silence is choice. Silence is strength dressed in satin. I could have screamed at them in the cellar. I could have slapped someone at the reception. I could have sent angry texts in all caps and broken a champagne glass on the dance floor. But I didn't, because they wrote afterthought on my name tag. And I wrote my name on the penthouse deed. People will tell you family is everything. But what they often mean is tolerate everything, or else you're the problem. I used to believe them. Not anymore. I walked out to the small balcony attached to my garden apartment. The morning air was crisp. The city was beginning to hum. In the distance, I could see Langston Tower, a glimmering spire of glass and stone. They were probably still in bed, maybe hungover, maybe arguing, maybe pretending nothing had happened. That's their choice. Mine? I was sipping tea in peace, holding a key that used to be theirs. My phone buzzed one last time, a text from Christopher. Can we talk, please? Just that. No mom, no apology. Just panic dressed up as civility. I didn't respond. Instead, I whispered to the sky. They'll call. Because they labeled me as last. I'm just reminding them. I've always been ahead. And with that, I pocketed the key, finished my tea, and began packing. I wasn't planning on returning to the venue. Not after what happened. Not after the thud of silence that followed me out of the ballroom like a closing door. But I'd forgotten my wrap. A silk one, ivory-colored with hand-stitched vines. My late husband had given it to me the year Christopher graduated high school. So I went back quietly mid-morning, while the staff was still packing up floral arches and folding chairs like they'd never witnessed any cruelty. The lobby smelled like roses and spilled champagne. That's when I saw her. Carol. I hadn't seen her in years. We were friends once, back when our sons played baseball together, and we used to bake scones for PTA meetings. Time had been generous to her spirit, if not her hair. It was fully gray now, pulled into a tight bun. She stood behind the reception desk in a charcoal blazer, scrolling through a clipboard. She looked up and froze. Helen? I smiled. Carol. She came around the desk and wrapped me in a hug before I could prepare for it. You haven't changed a bit, she whispered. I laughed lightly. Then I must have aged early. We sat on a bench near the coat check. She didn't ask why I left early. She didn't mention the placement card or the table by the bathroom. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in a cocktail napkin. I wasn't sure if I should keep this, she said. But when I saw it in the trash bin, she handed it to me. It was an envelope, cream cardstock, embossed in gold, and slashed across the front in blue ballpoint ink was my name, Mrs. Helen Worthing. But it had been crossed out, twice. The ink dug deep into the paper, like someone wanted to erase me with force, like I'd been invited, then uninvited with intention. Carol looked away. They told the printers they only needed 48 invitations, she said gently. But I remembered this one. I wrote your address on it myself. It had already been sorted for delivery. I stared at it. Something hot and bitter twisted in my throat. But I didn't cry. Instead, I folded it, pressed the creases softly, and said, "Thank you for returning it to me." We sat in silence. Carol pulled out her thermos and poured 2 small cups of chamomile tea, like she used to on the baseball sidelines. The scent made me nostalgic for years, when Christopher still looked for me in the bleachers. I wasn't supposed to be working that night, she said after a while. But someone called out sick. I almost didn't take the shift. You're still working events? I asked. She nodded. 3 nights a week keeps me moving, And to be honest, I like watching people forget they're being watched. That made me smile. Carol always had a quiet kind of wisdom, the kind you don't notice until you need it. I once got cut out of a wedding too, she said suddenly. Not mine, my niece's. I raised her for 5 years after her mom passed. I turned to her, surprised. She removed you from the guest list? Carol shrugged. Her fiancé said I was too old school. I guess that meant I didn't have Instagram. They printed digital invites and sent them out through an app. Didn't think I'd notice. I clenched the napkin tighter around the envelope. What did you do? Carol smiled. I waited. For what? For the day they lost power and couldn't log into anything. She called crying because she didn't remember anyone's number except mine. We both laughed, not loudly, just the kind that comes from something tender and earned. I stared at the crossed-out invitation in my hands again. You're going to keep it? She asked. I am, I said, but not to dwell. I stood and walked over to the gift shop near the elevators. 10 minutes later, I returned with a wooden photo frame, oak finish, simple and elegant. I slipped the envelope inside, pressed the glass shut, and set it upright. Carol tilted her head. Art? A reminder, I said. Of what? I looked at her. That even when they try to erase your name, the paper still remembers the first one written. Carol touched my arm before I left. If you ever want to share a pot of tea again, you know where to find me. I do. I hugged her again. She didn't ask me if I was okay, and I didn't pretend to be, but for the first time in a while I felt seen. Not because someone needed something from me, but because someone remembered me. I brought the framed envelope home that night and placed it on my bookshelf, right beside the wedding album for my wedding, the one where my name hadn't been crossed out, the one where love had still meant inclusion. The morning after the wedding, soft light poured through my bay window. 36 missed calls blinked on my phone screen like tiny red accusations. 5 from Christopher, 4 from a number I assumed was Emily's mother, and others scattered from the wedding planner, the venue manager, even Christopher's best man. The world had finally noticed my absence, hours after I'd walked away. I took my time preparing Earl Grey in my favorite chipped porcelain mug, the one with the crack shaped like a crescent moon, before checking the messages. No voicemails, no texts offering explanations or apologies, just panic disguised as concern. Ava called precisely at 9, her voice crisp and efficient. Congratulations, Mrs. Worthing, it's official. You're now the sole registered owner of Unit 4403 Langston Tower. The deed is updated and filed. The words settled around me like autumn leaves, not a victory, but a necessary correction. You also asked me to blind copy the wedding planner. And the bride's family attorney, I reminded her. I heard the faint click of her keyboard in the background. Both copies delivered and time-stamped. No one can claim they didn't know. Then her tone shifted, just slightly. Do you want silence, or do you want closure? The question hung between us, unexpected and profound. She wasn't asking about paperwork. She was asking about the wound beneath it all. But I'd learned something important in the past 24 hours. Closure is what they sell you when silence feels too much like surrender, I told her. I'll take my peace instead. An hour later, a cream envelope waited on my hallway console, hand-delivered by courier. Inside lay a single brass key, the kind that unlocks private elevators, the kind not given lightly, and a note printed on Langston letterhead. For your records, Mrs. Worthing, the penthouse belongs solely to you. All prior decorating appointments have been canceled at your request. Kindly let us know when you'd like the space prepared. I held the key between my fingers, feeling its surprising weight. It was warm, though not from the metal itself, but from the memory of how they used to hand me only the spare. Just in case, they'd say. Not the main one, not the one they gave to the decorator or concierge, just the extra, the afterthought. Now I held the only copy. I placed it on my dining table beside a linen napkin embroidered with my initials. No post-its this time. No calligraphy lies. No polite erasures of who I was. Just my name on my deed beside my key. My phone buzzed again. Call number 37. Emily. I watched it ring, then ring again, until silence returned. There's a strength in choosing when to speak and when to let quiet do the talking. I could have screamed in the wine cellar. I could have created a scene at the reception. I could have sent angry texts or shattered glass on the dance floor. But I didn't, because they wrote afterthought on my name tag, and I wrote my name on the penthouse deed. The morning air carried a hint of autumn as I stepped onto my small balcony. The city hummed below, buildings catching the golden light. In the distance, Langston Tower rose like a silver needle piercing the sky. They were probably still in bed, perhaps hungover, perhaps arguing, perhaps pretending nothing had happened. That was their choice. Mine? I was sipping tea in peace, holding a key that used to be theirs. My phone lit up with a text from Christopher. "Can we talk, please?" Just that. No mom, no apology, just panic dressed as civility. I didn't respond. Instead, I whispered to the breeze, "They labeled me as last, but I've always been ahead." The ivory silk wrap had been a gift from Harold the year Christopher graduated high school. I couldn't leave it behind at the venue, not when it carried the memory of Harold's smile as he draped it over my shoulders that night, whispering that I looked like moonlight. So I returned to the Langston mid-morning, when the staff would still be clearing centerpieces and folding chairs like they'd never witnessed any cruelty. The lobby smelled of roses and champagne residue. That's when I saw her, Carol Peterson, standing behind the reception desk in a charcoal blazer, her once auburn hair now fully gray and pulled into a neat bun. We had been friends years ago, when our sons played Little League together, and we baked scones for PTA meetings before life pulled us in different directions. She looked up from her clipboard and froze. "Helen?" Her voice carried genuine warmth, not the manufactured kind I'd grown accustomed to. "Carol!" The name felt familiar on my tongue, comfortable like an old sweater. She came around the desk and embraced me before I could prepare myself. "You haven't changed a bit." Then I must have aged early. The joke slipped out easily, remnants of who we used to be together. We settled on a bench near the coat check, away from the staff dismantling wedding decorations. She didn't ask why I'd left early. She didn't mention the placement card or the table by the bathroom. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in a cocktail napkin. I wasn't sure if I should keep this, but when I saw it in the trash bin, she placed it gently in my hands, an envelope. N, cream cardstock, embossed in gold. Across the front, in blue ballpoint ink, my name had been written, Mrs. Helen Worthing. But it wasn't simply crossed out, it was viciously eliminated, the pen digging so deep it nearly tore through the paper. Someone had wanted to erase me with force, like I'd been invited, then deliberately uninvited. Carol's eyes softened. They told the printers they only needed 48 invitations, but I remembered this one specifically. I wrote your address on it myself. It had already been sorted for delivery. Something hot and bitter twisted in my throat, but I refused to let it rise further. Instead, I folded the envelope, pressed the creases deliberately, and thanked her for returning it to me. Carol poured chamomile tea from her thermos into 2 paper cups, just like she used to during freezing baseball games when our boys were 9. The familiar scent transported me to a time when Christopher still searched for me in the bleachers, when his eyes would light up finding me there. "I wasn't supposed to be working last night," Carol confided. "Someone called in sick. I almost didn't take the shift." "You're still working events?" Her smile carried no regret. 3 nights a week keeps me moving. And to be honest, I like watching people forget they're being watched." That made me smile. Carol always possessed a quiet wisdom, the kind that arrives unannounced when most needed. "I once got cut out of a wedding too," she revealed. "Not mine, my niece's. I raised her for 5 years after her mother passed." The parallel caught me off guard. "She removed you from the guest list?" Carol shrugged, the hurt visible only in the corners of her eyes. Her fiancé said I was too old school. I guess that meant I didn't have Instagram. They sent digital invites through some app. Didn't think I'd notice. I clutched the napkin tighter around my crossed-out name. "What did you do?" A soft, knowing smile crossed her face. I waited. For what? For the day they lost power and couldn't log into anything? She called crying because she didn't remember anyone's number except mine. Our laughter wasn't loud, just the gentle kind that comes from recognizing a shared wound, a shared victory. I examined the mutilated invitation again, this strange artifact of rejection. "You're keeping it?" Carol asked. "Yes," I decided. But not to dwell. I walked to the gift shop near the elevators, returning 10 minutes later with a wooden photo frame, oak finish, simple and dignified. I slipped the envelope inside, secured the backing, and set it upright on the bench between us. Carol studied it, her head tilted. Art? A reminder. Of what? That even when they try to erase your name, the paper still remembers the first one written. We embraced again before parting. She didn't ask if I was okay, and I didn't pretend to be. But for the first time since the wedding began, I felt truly seen. Not because someone wanted something from me, but simply because someone remembered who I was. I placed the framed envelope on my bookshelf that evening, next to the wedding album from my own marriage, where my name hadn't been crossed out, where love had still meant inclusion. I asked Emily to meet me at Murphy's Diner 3 days later. A quiet corner booth, no white linens, no waiters announcing wine vintages, just chipped mugs, warm coffee, and a red leather menu that had witnessed more truth than the ballroom ever would. She arrived 10 minutes late, no apology offered. Designer slacks and a silk blouse whispered, "I deserve better than this." Her eyes darted around the diner as if searching for hidden photographers before she slid into the booth across from me. "I assume you asked to meet so we can renegotiate." Her tone was flat, controlled, as if I were a difficult client who'd overstepped, not the mother of the man she'd married. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream create galaxies. "No, I'm not here to negotiate." She blinked, then leaned forward, placing both hands on the table like staking territory. "I get that you're upset about the wedding, but this isn't personal. This is real estate, investment, family planning." I studied her for a long moment, then quietly slid a folder across the table. She opened it, her fingers trembling slightly as she scanned the document inside. It wasn't a deed transfer or a sale agreement. It was a lease. Not a gift, not a permanent arrangement, just a 12-month agreement with a line item that made her lips press into a thin line. Conditional occupancy clause, tenant must complete 15 volunteer hours per week at Mayfield Women's Shelter during tenancy. She laughed once, but it wasn't amusement. "This is a joke, right?" "No." The word carried no anger, just certainty. "You can't be serious. You want me to mop floors and sort food donations for a bunch of women who didn't plan ahead in life?" The coldness of her assessment settled between us like frost. "They didn't plan to be beaten either," I replied evenly, "or pregnant at 17, or left with children and no health insurance." Emily looked away, her jaw tightening. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it breathe. "I didn't take anything from you," she finally muttered. "This penthouse was promised to me. Christopher told me it was part of our long-term security." "And did you ever ask him who secured it before he promised it away?" She looked at me then, really looked, and I could tell she truly didn't know. She thought the Langston project was Christopher's achievement. He'd bragged about working with investors, choosing finishes, managing architects. But I was the anchor investor. I held the equity shares. I funded the second phase when the board pulled out. "This was mine," I explained without malice, "long before your wedding hashtags and floral centerpieces." Emily's voice dropped, icy. "You didn't have to do this." "No," I nodded. "But I did." She glanced at the lease again, contempt barely concealed. "You're punishing me. I'm inviting you to understand the people whose backs hold up the penthouse floor you want to live on." She laughed again, tighter this time. "Do you think I'm going to parade around in an apron for Instagram? That I'll cry with broken women to earn a room in your precious tower?" I set my coffee cup down gently. "I think if you want to stand on the 57th floor, you should know how to stand tall on ground level." Her hands curled into fists, but her eyes wavered. I saw something crack beneath the pride. Not defeat, but recognition. Just for a second. She pushed the folder back toward me. "I need time." "You have 48 hours," I replied. After that, it goes to someone else on the wait list. She blinked rapidly. You're renting it to the public? No, to a retired school teacher with a disabled son. She works 2 jobs and still writes poetry on Sundays. Emily stared at me, comprehension dawning. You're doing this to make a point. I picked up my coffee. I already made it. You're the one deciding whether you want to learn from it. We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. We didn't pretend this was healing. But as she walked out, shoulders a little lower, steps a little slower, I saw the weight of entitlement begin to slip. She didn't know yet how much that weight had been dragging her down, but she would. I sat there a while longer, paid the bill in cash, tipped generously, then opened my planner and circled a date, a quiet reminder to myself that justice doesn't need a stage. Sometimes it's just a signature, a line drawn gently but firmly in ink. I didn't expect her to say yes. But 41 hours after our diner meeting, Ava forwarded me the signed lease, typed signature, timestamp, Emily Whitmore, tenant. Ava had attached a brief note. Penthouse keys delivered, move-in confirmed, shelter, start date, this Friday, 9:05 a.m. I closed the email, took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, exhaled with hope. The doorbell rang at 9 on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the wedding. I wasn't expecting visitors, especially not Leonard Whitmore, Emily's father, and my son's new father-in-law. His suit looked slept in, not from poverty, but from pride worn too thin. His tie was askew, but his hair was perfectly combed. Men like Leonard always made sure the part looked fine, even when everything underneath had unraveled. "Mrs. Worthing," he began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone used to being listened to. I stepped aside to let him enter my modest apartment. The view from my living room window couldn't compare to the penthouse vistas, but the morning light made the space glow with a quiet dignity. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, arms folded behind his back as if practicing a pitch he'd delivered 100 times and still didn't believe. Finally, he exhaled heavily. "I suppose congratulations are in order." I didn't respond, waiting for what he'd really come to say. He turned and offered a strained half-smile. "Emily told me you're the owner now." I offered him coffee. He declined with a short shake of his head. I offered him silence instead. He took it for a moment. "You know, Helen, there was a time I admired your husband. Harold was formidable." I nodded, the unexpected mention of Harold's name catching me off guard. Back when I tried to start Whitmore Capital, I went to him for backing. Leonard's eyes drifted to the window. He listened politely, then said he'd rather invest in cement. The memory surfaced. Harold at our kitchen table, reviewing Leonard's business proposal, shaking his head. "Too many promises. Not enough foundation," he'd said afterward. "He was right," Leonard added with a short, rueful laugh. "Whitmore Capital didn't last the year." He walked to the window, gazing at the cityscape as if trying to locate where his dreams had fallen. I never told Emily that. To her, I've always been the man with answers, with control, the architect of her upbringing. He turned to face me, something vulnerable breaking through his corporate veneer. "But you're rewriting that story, and I fear she's not ready for it." I studied him, not with disdain or even judgment, just with the clarity of long memory. "I don't hold grudges, Leonard, but I remember every no." His jaw clenched, then relaxed with visible effort. "I'm not here to ask you to undo what's been done. I came to ask for a bridge, a path forward for Emily, for our families. Is that why you're here? Because she's uncomfortable or because she's changing?" He hesitated, the question finding its mark. "She's trying," he finally said, the admission clearly difficult for him. I walked to my desk, opened a drawer, and took out the same silver-framed photo Emily had returned with her dismissive post-it. "We already have enough." I placed it on the coffee table between us. "Need is a funny thing," I observed. "You don't feel it until what you have turns out to be borrowed." Leonard picked up the frame, studying it longer than I expected. Then he looked up, his businessman facade momentarily stripped away. "No money then." "No," I said gently. "But something else." I handed him an envelope. Inside was a copy of the lease agreement Emily had signed, with the shelter clause highlighted. Tenant agrees to maintain active participation in the Mayfield Shelter's rehabilitation and outreach program. Minimum 3 days per week for the duration of lease term. Leonard read it twice, his expression unreadable. You're making her work for the roof over her head. I'm giving her a chance to earn the ground under her feet. He set the paper down with deliberate care. She won't understand it. Not at first. She doesn't have to, I replied. She just has to keep showing up. He looked at me with new awareness. She's not you, Helen. No, I agreed. She never had to be, but that doesn't mean she gets to dismiss who I am. Leonard stepped back, the silence between us shifting, warmer now, but heavier. She was raised to believe comfort is owed. You're trying to teach her that compassion is earned. I smiled slightly at his unexpected insight. Harold said no to you. You built anyway. Now I'm saying no to her. Let's see what she builds. He stood for a long moment, then nodded. Not in defeat, but in recognition. Before he left, he paused at the door. You know, if Harold had said yes to me back then, Emily's life would have been different. I met his gaze with newfound clarity between us. If Harold had said yes, she might never learn to say it to someone who truly needs it. As the door closed behind him, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers, it waits. And sometimes it knocks on your door wearing a rumpled suit, asking for mercy it once withheld. The knock on my door came earlier than expected on Thursday morning. It wasn't the sound of apology or remorse. It was the sound of someone who still believed they were right. Christopher stood in the hallway wearing his usual cashmere coat, the one I'd bought him in his 3rd year of medical school. His eyes looked tired, not from work, but from the weight of the story he'd told himself. Can I come in? The question carried the tone of a stranger requesting entry. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of my living room, pacing slightly, the way Harold used to before he'd ask for something unreasonable, but make it sound logical. I heard from Emily's dad, Christopher began, his voice level but his jaw clenched. She's been cleaning floors at that shelter. Is that what you wanted, Mom? I didn't respond immediately, letting his question settle between us. You know she's not cut out for that. It's humiliating. Is it? I finally asked. Or is it illuminating? He scoffed, a sound so dismissive it could have come from Emily herself. Come on, you've made your point. You own the penthouse. You have the leverage. But dragging her through this, it's not like you. No, I said quietly. It's not like the version of me you've kept in a box labeled, "Don't ruin the vibe." He blinked, caught off guard by the directness. Mom, what I meant was, when you saw me sitting by the kitchen door at your wedding, I interrupted. Did you feel anything, or did you look away? His silence answered for him, deafening in its honesty. I took a slow breath. You were raised by a woman who stood in line for food stamps with you on her hip, who worked night shifts, skipped dinners, mended your father's debts, and somehow along the way you decided that woman could be sidelined at her own son's wedding. He didn't deny it. He didn't defend it. But his voice, when it returned, was sharper than I expected. Do you even care what this is doing to us? And there it was, the fear, not of justice, but of discomfort. Not of my pain, but of the inconvenience of acknowledging it. You're afraid of how this looks, I said, the realization crystallizing. But I'm afraid of what I've become, a mother who swallowed enough insults in silence to make her son forget she has a voice. I stood, matching his height, meeting his gaze. You're worried I've gone too far. I'm worried I didn't draw the line soon enough. He looked like he wanted to say something, anything to regain control of the conversation. But I saw it. The flicker of doubt, the flash of understanding. He wasn't just defending Emily. He was defending the fragile system that kept him from facing the mirror. You think I'm punishing her? I asked softly. Aren't you? No, I'm reminding her, reminding both of you, that love without respect isn't love. It's entitlement. He finally sat down, the fight draining from his posture, And then, for the first time in our conversation, he didn't talk over me. He just listened. I don't hate her, Christopher, but I can't reward her cruelty with comfort. She wanted the view from the 57th floor without seeing the woman who built the elevator shaft. Christopher dropped his gaze to his hands. You raised me better than this, he admitted, the words barely audible. I nodded. That's why I'm doing this, so you remember. He stood again, slower this time, no longer the indignant defender, but the son beginning to see the shadow he'd cast. I'll talk to her. Don't, I replied. Just watch her, and decide if that's the woman you want beside you when you're 70. He reached the door, paused with his hand on the knob, then turned back. His question came like a child's, stripped of pretense. You're not mad at me, are you? I smiled, not from joy, but from a place of resignation tinged with hope. No, Chris, I'm just finally mad for me. I didn't go to the shelter. I let silence be the mirror. Sometimes silence says more than any scolding ever could. But Carol passed along whispers. Emily had started showing up early. No makeup, no silk scarf, no excuses. They said she barely spoke at first. She just watched. Watched Arlene refill the coffee urn. Watched old men trace photographs with trembling fingers. Watched women fold blankets for strangers with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. It was Carol who told me what happened one Tuesday afternoon. Emily was scrubbing the corner tiles of the women's bathroom. The grout was caked with things she'd never had to name. Her nails were cracked, her fingers raw, but she didn't stop. Arlene walked in. Arlene who'd lost her son to a system that couldn't hold his sorrow. Arlene who always remembered names even when people forgot hers. You missed a spot, Arlene said with a smile, pointing with her cane. Emily looked up, flushed with frustration. I know, I'm trying. I didn't mean the tile, sweetheart, Arlene said gently. I meant your heart. Emily sat back on her heels, exhausted. It doesn't matter. No one sees me here anyway. That's funny, Arlene replied. Because I've been seeing you all week. Silence fell between them. Then Emily, maybe from pure fatigue or maybe something deeper, whispered, I used to think people like you ended up here because they made mistakes, but now I think I'm the one who made them. Arlene lowered herself onto a nearby chair, her knees cracking but her voice steady. We all make mistakes. That's not the point. The point is who you become when no one's watching. Emily looked at her, something vulnerable breaking through. I was watching my whole life, watching my mom clean houses, watching her skip dinner so I could eat, watching her work 2 shifts and still get called lazy. I was watching. I just never said thank you. Arlene tilted her head. Where is she now? Emily hesitated. She collapsed at work. Heart failure. They said it was silent. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I was in college. I had just texted her that she was overbearing, that she needed to stop calling so much, that I wasn't a kid anymore. The tears came slowly. She didn't wipe them away. I called her a burden. I called my own mother a burden. Arlene didn't reach out. She didn't hug her. She just looked at her steadily. Sounds to me, Arlene said softly, like you've been trying to erase that label ever since. Emily nodded, the simple truth finding its mark. Arlene took a deep breath. You know, I used to work in a print shop. Back when people still ordered business cards, folks would come in with typos or the wrong job title or a name they didn't want anymore. She smiled faintly. You'd be surprised how easy it is to run a new print, but you'd be shocked how few people bother to ask for one. Emily looked puzzled. Arlene pointed to the shelter's front desk, where the volunteers' name tags were stacked, laminated, taped. You don't have to keep wearing the first name they gave you. Emily stood slowly, walked to the desk, picked up one of the blank tags. For a long while, she just held the marker. She didn't write volunteer. She didn't write Mrs. Langston. She didn't even write Emily. She wrote something in small, careful letters, something only she could read at first. Then she tucked the card into her pocket. Arlene smiled. Looks like you found your new label. Carol told me all of this the next day. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. But I did sit by the window longer than usual that morning, letting the sun pour in like something sacred. Because somewhere across the city, A woman who had once erased my name from a wedding invitation had just written her own name back into something real. Not on a deed, not on a gift tag, but on her own soul. The envelope came in the mail that morning, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably Carol's with her rounded cursive, an occasional loop too large for the line. Inside were two things. The first, a black and white photograph. I gasped before I even registered it fully. It was from a spring gala in '85. Harold and I were standing under a wisteria arch, champagne in hand, both laughing at something out of frame. I hadn't seen that photo in decades. Yet there we were. I looked so young. He looked like he still believed the world could be shaped into something soft. I traced his lapel with my thumb, the velvet trim, the slight smudge of lipstick I never noticed until now. The second item made my breath catch. It was a copy of Christopher and Emily's wedding invitation, but my name had been crossed out. A thick line of black marker slashed through Vesper Helen Worth Thing. Carol had found it in the hotel trash bin. "In case you ever needed to remember who you are," she'd written on a yellow sticky note, creased from handling. I placed the photo and the invitation side by side. Then slowly, I walked to the living room, pulled down an old album I hadn't opened in years. It creaked when I laid it on the table. Inside were pages of fading snapshots. Christopher's first tooth, Harold holding him up in the garden, me in my maternity dress laughing under a crooked clothesline. Life in sepia tones. I flipped to the back of the album and slipped the wedding invitation inside a clear sleeve, just behind our family Christmas photo from 1992. Then I added the photograph of Harold and me, sliding it carefully next to it. For a long while, I just sat there, fingers hovering over pages of memory. Then I reached for a note card, plain white with gold trim, no logo, no heading, and I wrote, "To the one who once called me a burden, I used to think I had to earn my space in every room, that being invited meant being grateful no matter the terms, that quiet suffering was a kind of grace. I stayed silent through years of dismissals, of being talked over, of being too much or not enough. I wore those labels like moth-eaten coats and still tried to smile in family photos. When you crossed my name off that invitation, you didn't just erase a guest. You tried to erase a history, but let me remind you, I was there when he had night terrors. I was there for every parent-teacher conference, every science fair, every scraped knee. I was there when no one else was. I gave more than I had, and still, I was labeled afterthought. You see, the insult wasn't in the seating chart. It was in the intent. You didn't just forget me. You chose to. But I chose something else. I chose to walk out of that room with my head held high. I chose not to shout, not to beg, not to crumble. I chose dignity. I chose to correct the ledger, not with cruelty, but with clarity. Because if you're going to print a label for me, at least let the record show the truth. I was never the burden. I carried the burden. And I carried it well. Still, I don't hate you. Hurt, yes. Disappointed, certainly. But hate? No. Hate is heavy, and I've carried enough. So I'll set that down now, and I'll keep this picture, I'll keep this album, I'll keep my name. And one day, if the silence breaks and you find your way back to memory, you might look for this letter. You might want to know what I felt. So here it is. I felt erased, but I stayed visible. I felt discarded, but I stayed whole. I felt forgotten, but I remembered myself. And I still chose dignity, even if it cost me everything else. Vesper Helen. I folded the letter, didn't sign it, didn't seal it. I tucked it into the back of the album, behind the pictures, behind the tears, behind the years. Some letters don't need to be sent to be true. They just need to be written. 48 hours later, a notification arrived from Ava. Lease signed by Emily Whitmore. Shelter start date this Friday, 9:00 a.m. I didn't call to check if she showed up. I didn't follow her there. I let the world do what it always does when entitlement meets consequence. It teaches. Rough at first, then fair. The first update came not from Emily, but from Carol. She volunteered at Mayfield Shelter every Thursday. She texted me one photo. Emily standing beside a crate of canned goods, looking utterly lost in a staff apron 2 sizes too big. Carol's caption was dry. She asked if the kitchen had oat milk. I didn't laugh. Well, maybe just a little. But mostly, I felt something else. Reluctant admiration. She showed up. She could have walked away, could have stayed in a hotel and blamed me for the rest of her life. But she didn't. Carol later told me Emily didn't speak to anyone on the first day. She hovered near the door, avoided eye contact, wore sunglasses indoors as if shame could be shaded like sunlight. She dropped a box of instant oatmeal trying to lift it onto a shelf, flinched when a toddler clung to her leg, wrinkled her nose when someone asked if she could wipe down the toilet stalls. By noon, she was pale and silent. By 2 p.m., she had asked twice if she was allowed to leave early. But then came Arlene, the kind of woman no one saw at the wedding. Her cardigan had holes. Her knuckles were cracked from years of dish soap and bus stops. She had 3 missing teeth and 1 photo in her wallet. A boy in a Little League uniform with Dante 2009 scribbled in blue pen. She lost him in a custody battle, then lost herself somewhere after that. Now she folded donated clothes and handed out toothpaste with more dignity than half the ballroom guests had ever shown me. Emily was folding socks when Arlene approached. Carol said she looked ready to recoil, but Arlene didn't judge. She just spoke. "You're new," she said. Emily nodded. "You'll probably leave," Arlene added matter-of-factly. That made Emily look up. Arlene shrugged. "Most do. They wear clean shoes and carry pity in their pockets. Then they get bored, grossed out, or just forget we exist." Emily's face tightened. "I'm not here to pity anyone." Arlene smiled. A slow, tired, knowing smile. "I hope not. I've been waiting a long time for someone who doesn't." Later that night, Carol told me Emily stayed an extra hour. No clock watching, no hand sanitizer after every task. She sat with a woman named Trina, who was 6 months clean and 5 days out of a breakup. She sorted canned goods with 2 kids who thought mac and cheese came in colors. She didn't ask for oat milk. She drank coffee, black, and took a second shift wiping tables. No text came from Emily, no apology, no request for acknowledgement. But on Sunday morning, a courier left something at my apartment, a bouquet of white daisies and green carnations. No note, no sender name. I knew who it was from. Emily had learned something, not everything, but something. I sat with the bouquet in my lap and whispered to the silence around me, "She's meeting the floor, and maybe, just maybe, she'll earn her way back up." I didn't believe in punishment, not really. What I believed in was perspective. And the only place you learn that is where the mirrors are cracked and the floor smells of bleach. Emily was starting to see, not me, not Christopher, but people she'd spent a lifetime stepping over. And if she kept showing up, they just might teach her how to stand without stepping on anyone ever again. I made roast chicken on a Thursday evening, not because it was a holiday, not because anyone was visiting, just because I had the time and the quiet. The rosemary from my little garden patch was still fragrant despite the autumn chill. I added it to the pan, drizzled olive oil, basted everything slowly. The kind of cooking you only do when no one's rushing you. The kind of meal that lets the house smell like warmth again. I had just finished setting the table. 2 plates, 2 cloth napkins, water with lemon slices, when I heard a knock. I didn't expect anyone, not really. I opened the door, and there he was, Christopher. No text, no warning, no Emily. Just him, holding a bottle of apple cider. Thought this might go better with chicken than the usual wine. I didn't say anything, just stepped aside to let him in. He looked around the apartment like it was the first time he'd really seen it. His eyes paused on the mantel, where an old photograph of Harold and me stood next to a new one of me holding Lily last Christmas. "You changed the curtains," he said. I nodded. "I change things sometimes." We sat. We didn't turn on the television. We didn't check our phones. We just ate. And the silence wasn't sharp. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was patient. He took a bite, chewed slowly, then said, "This tastes like Sundays when I was 10. I smiled softly. "It is." He didn't say much for a while. Then over the last spoonfuls of mashed potatoes, he set down his fork. His voice was quiet, careful. "Do you hate me, Mom?" I folded my napkin, looked at him, not through him, but at him. "No," I said. "I never could." He nodded as if trying to believe it, because sometimes I think I deserve it. I reached for my water, took a sip, then answered, I don't hate you, Christopher, but I was angry. Not just at you, at myself. He looked confused. At yourself? For being silent for so long, for shrinking myself to fit into everyone's plans, for thinking if I just stayed quiet, if I smiled enough, everything would hold together. He dropped his eyes, staring at his empty plate. I let people call me things. Afterthought, burden. Not with words, but with how they treated me. And I let it happen, over and over. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand gently. This isn't blame, Chris. This is clarity. You were raised by a woman who thought self-sacrifice was love, who never taught you to question that. He swallowed hard. I should have protected you. No, I said softly. You should have seen me. That's all. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed not from anger, but recognition. I see you now, he whispered. I nodded. Then we begin here. He looked around the apartment, blinking. It's quieter than I remember. I smiled. That's because the noise is gone. We cleared the dishes together like we used to years ago. No rush. When he left, he paused at the door. I'm proud of you, he said. I touched his arm. I'm still proud of you too, even when I was hurt. He stepped out into the cold evening. I closed the door slowly behind him. The house held a different stillness now. Not lonely, but lived in. Not waiting, just being. I sat down at the table again, poured myself a second glass of cider, and lit the candle in the center. It flickered gently. Sometimes the most powerful redemption doesn't arrive with a bang or a speech. Sometimes it looks like a grown man coming home for dinner. Sometimes it sounds like two people eating in silence because words are no longer needed to prove they care. And sometimes that's enough. I waited until the house was quiet again. No knocks, no calls, just me, my cup of peppermint tea, and the envelope that had been waiting on the desk for far too long. Unopened, not out of fear, but timing. The old trust papers were brittle, tired from decades of assumptions. I laid them out before me like a map I once followed blindly. Beside them, I placed a blank page, clean, wide, ready. I didn't call Ava. Not yet. This part I needed to draft by hand. The first name I wrote wasn't family. It was Safe Haven Shelter. I remembered the look in Emily's eyes that day when she handed out coats to children who never asked for pity. Only warmth. I remembered the way she knelt to tie a little boy's shoes and didn't flinch when his hands were sticky, when his voice was loud. They had undone something in her, those children. And for that, the shelter deserved more than a check. It deserved a future. I wrote, 10% of the trust will go to Safe Haven Shelter annually in perpetuity. Then I added a name beneath that clause, one that hadn't appeared in any version before. Arlene. No last name, just Arlene. The woman who sat in silence beside Emily during her first breakdown. The woman who had lost more than I could ever imagine, but still showed up, still stayed late, still remembered other people's birthdays. A personal bequest of $250,000 to Arlene to be used at her full discretion. No conditions, no questions. I paused, let the weight of that line sink in. Too many people go through life without anyone trusting them with anything. She had trusted Emily with her story. Now it was time someone trusted her back. Next came Christopher. This part was harder. I thought of how he'd shown up without warning, how he didn't make excuses, didn't demand forgiveness, how he'd simply sat, eaten, remembered who I was. I didn't want to reward performance. I wanted to affirm growth. Christopher Worthing shall inherit 20% of the estate contingent upon his voluntary service of 200 hours at any registered community organization over the next 24 months. Proof of completion to be submitted via affidavit. Not a punishment, a reminder. Love without contribution isn't legacy, it's expectation. Finally, I came to the penthouse. I looked out my own window. The view from here wasn't as high, not as dramatic, but it was mine. And for the first time, I saw clearly what that meant. Emily's name came last. I wrote, The Langston Penthouse 57th floor is to be gifted in full to Emily Worthing under the following conditions: that she continue her service at Safe Haven Shelter for a minimum of 2 days per week for no less than 3 years, that she submit annual reports detailing community projects she has initiated or supported, that if either condition is not met for more than 2 consecutive quarters, ownership reverts to the Helen Worthing Foundation. I leaned back. I wasn't writing this out of spite or control. I was writing it out of truth, because power means nothing if you hoard it, but stewardship builds something lasting. I signed at the bottom with a slow, deliberate hand. Helen Worthing, the same name once scribbled on the edge of a wedding invitation, then crossed out. I sealed the document and whispered to no one in particular, "Real power isn't in what you own, it's in how you leave it behind." The wind moved gently through the open window. Somewhere in the city, I imagined Emily walking out of the shelter, wiping sweat from her brow, waving goodbye to Maria. Somewhere else, Arlene might be sipping coffee from her new porch. And maybe, just maybe, Christopher was helping someone move boxes in a church basement. Not for a check, not for a clause, just to feel useful again. I didn't need to witness it all. Legacy doesn't ask for applause. It only asks that you show up while you're here and leave quietly when the time is right. It was a Tuesday. Not the kind you circle on calendars, no big milestones, no photographers, just a handwritten flyer taped to the shelter's side gate. Warm winter gathering, all welcome. Emily had written the words herself. I recognized her loops and soft angles, even from a distance. The letters had the warmth of someone who finally knew what it meant to open her arms. Inside, the folding chairs weren't matching. The tablecloths were creased, and the centerpieces were simple glass jars filled with wildflowers and crayons for the kids. It was perfect. Everyone wore a name tag, not the cheap ones from printers. These were crafted from thick cardstock cut with pinking shears, calligraphy in black ink, full names, no abbreviations, no roles missing. No one was just +1. No one was guest. As I stepped through the door, Loretta waved me in. "There she is," she said, like I'd been expected. Emily crossed the room. Her sweater had paint on the cuff. Her hair wasn't styled, just pulled back with a pencil, and she looked more radiant than she did on her wedding day. She didn't make a speech. She didn't apologize with tears. She simply took my hand and whispered, "You sit at the head of the table, Mom." It wasn't a performance. It was a placement. I walked toward the seat she pointed to, covered in a soft yellow cushion, and I smiled as I lowered myself onto it. The light from the window brushed across the table, and for a second the air felt golden. From my purse, I took out the old name tag, the one with sharp block letters, no curve, no warmth, just one word, afterthought. I laid it gently on the table in front of me. Not bitter, not wounded, just honest. Then beside it, I placed the new one, Helen, Mother. The 2 cards sat side by side. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Across the room, Christopher laughed with Loretta over a crooked tray of cookies. Arlene adjusted Maria's scarf and helped her fold a paper swan. Ava dropped off a stack of donated gloves and gave me a wink. This wasn't the ending I'd planned, but maybe that's the miracle. Sometimes you have to be mistaken for the last to matter, to become the one they remember most. We stayed long after the food was gone. Emily poured cider into chipped mugs. The heater clicked on and off. The children kept coloring, and I looked around at a room that had once been filled with strangers and saw family, not by blood, but by choice. Before the lights dimmed, I stood to leave. Emily walked me to the door, her hand warm on mine. "Thank you," she said. Just 2 words, but this time they weren't transactional. They were tender. I didn't say anything back. I didn't need to. She opened the door and the cold air greeted us with a hush. A soft snow had begun to fall. Quiet flakes, slow and unbothered. I stepped outside, clutching both name tags in one hand. And just before the screen door shut behind me, I heard Loretta's voice say to the room, "She was never just a guest." I had seen the change in Emily over these months. Carol kept me updated. Little stories from the shelter that revealed the woman emerging from behind the perfect facade. The first time Emily stayed after hours to help a young mother study for her GED. The afternoon she spent teaching 3 elderly residents how to set up email accounts so they could see photos of distant grandchildren. How she started bringing fresh flowers for the front desk every Monday. Not expensive arrangements, just simple bunches from the farmer's market, bright spots of color in a place that needed beauty. Small things, perhaps, but transformation rarely announces itself with fanfare. It arrives in quiet moments when no one is watching, when there's nothing to be gained but the simple satisfaction of being better today than yesterday. I hadn't been to the penthouse since the wedding. But one morning in December, I received a text from Emily asking if I would meet her there. No explanation, just a time. 2:15 p.m. The private elevator felt familiar yet strange as it ascended to the 57th floor. I used the brass key, the one that was never meant to be mine alone. The doors opened silently onto Italian marble floors that gleamed in the winter sunlight. Emily was waiting by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread below her like a vast constellation. She turned when she heard me, and for a moment, we simply regarded each other across the expanse of empty space. The penthouse had no furniture yet, no decorations, just pristine white walls and endless possibility. "I wanted you to see it first," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the emptiness, "before we make any decisions." I stepped further into the room, my heels clicking against the marble. Decisions? Emily walked toward a small table, the only piece in the room, where blueprints were spread out. "We're redesigning, not everything, but the important parts." She unrolled the plans, revealing detailed drawings of built-in bookshelves, window seats, a reading nook. I recognized the design instantly. Harold's work, the same built-ins they had once planned to gut without a second thought. "Christopher found his father's original sketches in your attic. We asked the architect to incorporate them." Her fingers traced the pencil lines with unexpected reverence. "They're beautiful. I didn't see it before." I stood beside her, studying the familiar curves and angles Harold had spent evenings perfecting at our kitchen table. He believed spaces should hold people, not just impress them. Emily nodded, a new understanding in her eyes. "The decorator wanted to know if you'd help us choose the materials, the woods, the finishes." She hesitated. "You knew him best." The request hung between us, simple yet profound, not an afterthought, but a beginning. I touched the corner of the blueprint, feeling Harold's presence in the precision of each line. "I'd like that very much." We walked through the empty rooms together, our voices mixing with the memories I'd once feared would be erased. Emily pointed to a corner with exceptional light. "We thought this could be Lily's area when she visits, a place that's just hers." The mention of my granddaughter brought unexpected warmth. "She'd like that. She loves hiding spots with pillows." "I know," Emily smiled. "She told me. We've been reading together at the shelter on Thursdays." The revelation surprised me. I hadn't known they'd formed their own relationship outside my presence, something private and genuine between them. As we completed the tour, Emily led me to the terrace. The December air was sharp, but the view stretched beyond description, the city transforming in the late afternoon light. "I understand now," Emily said quietly, her breath visible in the cold. "Why this place mattered so much to you and Harold. It's not just property, it's perspective." I gripped the railing, feeling the cold metal beneath my fingers. "Yes, you can see everything from up here, but the trick is remembering what it looks like from down there." She turned to me, the winter sun illuminating half her face in gold. "I won't forget again." We stood in comfortable silence, watching the city prepare for evening, small lights flickering on in office buildings, cars moving in organized chaos below, people heading home to families and empty apartments alike. "I've been thinking about my mother lately," Emily said suddenly. "How she never got to see any of this. The wedding, this place," she paused, "the person I'm trying to become." The admission carried weight, not an invitation for sympathy, but a sharing of truth. "Some people leave before their lessons are finished," I offered. But that doesn't mean the teaching stops. Emily nodded, her eyes following a plane traversing the distant sky. The hardest part isn't that she's gone. It's that I wasted so much time being embarrassed by her. Her accent, her clothes, the way she saved every plastic container like it was treasure. Her voice caught. Now I understand she just knew the value of things better than I did. In that moment, I saw not the woman who had returned my gift with a dismissive note, but someone grappling with the same questions that had followed me through life. Who are we when stripped of pretense? What remains when everything external falls away? We can honor them by becoming the people they believed we could be, I said gently, even when we couldn't see it ourselves. She turned to me, her eyes clear and direct. I'm donating my interior design services to the shelter. They need to renovate the children's area. Loretta's been trying to find someone for months. The announcement came without fanfare, yet it represented everything I'd hoped might grow from this difficult season. Not obligation, but genuine contribution. Not performance, but purpose. They'll be lucky to have you, I said simply. As we prepared to leave, Emily handed me a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. This is for you, not because I need forgiveness, but because you deserve recognition. Inside was a leather-bound book. Opening it revealed photographs, not of the wedding, but of Harold. Images I'd never seen before. Harold launching Christopher on his shoulders at a park. Harold asleep in a hospital chair the day after Christopher's birth. Harold teaching Christopher to tie his shoes, both of their faces masks of concentration. Christopher had these in a box, Emily explained. He didn't know what to do with them. I thought maybe they belonged with you. I ran my fingers over a photograph of Harold at his drafting table, sleeves rolled up, completely absorbed in his work. Thank you. This is... The words failed, but Emily nodded in understanding. Memory isn't just about looking back, she said. It's about carrying forward. As the elevator descended, carrying us back to ground level, I realized something fundamental had shifted. The penthouse would never be just mine or just theirs. Like all meaningful spaces, it would become a vessel for whatever we chose to fill it with. Revenge or redemption, bitterness or beauty. I had chosen. And remarkably, so had they. January brought a heavy snowfall that blanketed the city in hushed white. I'd been working on a project of my own, organizing Harold's architectural papers for donation to the university archive. Boxes of sketches, notes, and blueprints that had languished in storage since his death were now spread across my dining table, each one a piece of the legacy he'd built without fanfare. Christopher arrived unannounced, stomping snow from his boots in the entryway. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, his arms laden with groceries. Thought we could make Dad's famous winter stew, he announced, moving toward the kitchen with familiar ease. I found his recipe card in that box of stuff Emily's been organizing. I followed him, watching as he unpacked root vegetables, beef, red wine, all the ingredients Harold would use on the coldest days of the year. You remember how to make it? Christopher pulled an old, stained recipe card from his pocket. I've been practicing. Made it 3 times last month. He grinned sheepishly. The first attempt was a disaster. Too much time. We worked together in comfortable rhythm, the kitchen filling with steam and savory aromas. Christopher chopped vegetables with surprising precision, while I prepared the Dutch oven that had been Harold's pride. I started volunteering at the Veterans Center downtown, Christopher mentioned casually, as if discussing the weather. Teaching basic financial literacy. Nothing fancy, just budgeting, savings accounts, that sort of thing. I kept my expression neutral, despite the surge of pride. How many hours so far? He glanced up, a knowing smile playing at his lips. 47. But I'm not counting for the trust amendment. I'm doing it because it matters. The stew simmered while we sat at the kitchen counter drinking tea, the snow outside creating a cocoon of quiet around the apartment. Christopher seemed different, more present, less defensive. The constant checking of his phone had vanished. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions about Harold's papers, examining blueprints with genuine interest. Dad was really ahead of his time with these sustainable designs, he observed, studying a sketch from the early 1990s. These passive solar elements, People are just starting to implement these ideas now. I nodded, seeing Harold's work through fresh eyes. He used to say buildings should work with nature, not against it. No one was listening then. Christopher carefully refolded the blueprint. I've been thinking about what you said, about perspective, about seeing people clearly. He traced the edge of his teacup with one finger. I didn't see Dad clearly either. I was so busy trying to be different from him that I missed what made him exceptional. The confession hung in the steamy kitchen air, honest and unadorned. He was proud of you, I said, even when you couldn't see it. I know that now. Christopher's eyes held a new steadiness. And I'm starting to understand why you did what you did. With the penthouse, with Emily, with me. He took a breath. You weren't punishing us. You were preserving something essential. The stew bubbled gently on the stove, releasing the scent of rosemary and red wine. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing footprints and softening edges. Did I ever tell you about the first building your father designed? I asked. It was a small library in a neighborhood that couldn't afford books. He included secret reading nooks where children could disappear into stories without being disturbed. I smiled at the memory. When they asked why he'd created so many hidden spaces, he said, "Everyone deserves a place where they can remember who they are." Christopher nodded slowly. Is that what you were doing for us? Creating a space where we could remember? Perhaps, I admitted. Or perhaps I was finally creating a space where I could remember who I was. We ate Harold's stew at the dining table, clearing a space among the blueprints and photographs. The taste transported us both. Rich, complex, warming from the inside out. Christopher told me about a young veteran who'd saved his first $1,000, about Emily's growing friendship with Arlene, about the shelter's children's area that was being transformed with bright colors and cozy reading corners. As he prepared to leave, bundling up against the snow, Christopher paused by the door. Mom, there's something else. Emily and I were thinking about starting a foundation, using part of my inheritance when it comes. His eyes met mine, clear and determined. For transitional housing, for women leaving difficult situations. The announcement settled between us like a gift, unexpected and precious. That sounds like a legacy worth building. He nodded, suddenly looking very much like his father. We thought we'd name it after two women who taught us about standing tall, the Helen Arlene Foundation. And after he left, I stood at the window watching his footprints in the snow until they disappeared beneath fresh flakes. The city lights glowed softly through the white veil of winter, each one representing a home, a story, a life in progress. I returned to Harold's papers, but with new purpose. Not just archiving the past, but securing it for a future that now seemed full of unexpected possibility. Spring arrived with surprising gentleness. The city shed its winter gray, replaced by tender green and the occasional burst of color from early blooming trees. I had taken to walking in the small park near my apartment each morning, watching the gradual awakening of the natural world. On one such morning, I found a small envelope taped to my door. Inside was a handwritten invitation, not embossed, not printed, just Emily's distinctive penmanship. The Safe Haven Children's Reading Room opening Saturday, April 15th, 11:00 a.m. Your presence is specifically requested and deeply valued. Below, in smaller script, this space exists because you showed us how to see. I arrived at the shelter that Saturday to find a transformation. The once institutional hallway leading to the children's area had been painted in gentle blues and greens. Quotes about imagination and courage had been stenciled along the walls in whimsical lettering. Children's artwork hung in simple frames, honored like masterpieces. Arlene greeted me at the entrance, her smile wide and genuine. They've been working day and night to finish it. Even the contractor caught the spirit, donated half his labor when he saw what they were creating. She led me toward a small gathering at the end of the hallway. Christopher stood with an arm around Emily, both looking exhausted but exhilarated. Loretta was there with several shelter residents. Maria, now 8, bounced impatiently beside a large purple ribbon stretched across a doorway. When they saw me, a hush fell over the group. Emily stepped forward, taking my hands in hers. "We couldn't do this without you here." She guided me to the ribbon, placing a pair of large scissors in my hands. I hesitated, surprised by the gesture. "Shouldn't you do the honors? This is your project." Emily shook her head. "This is your legacy. We're just building on the foundation you laid." With steady hands, I cut the ribbon. The door swung open to reveal a space utterly transformed from the dingy room I remembered. Bookshelves built to herald specifications lined the walls, filled with colorful volumes. Window seats with cushions offered cozy reading nooks. A central table stood ready for crafts and homework. In one corner, a rocking chair waited beside a floor lamp, creating a perfect spot for reading aloud. But what caught my breath was the wall directly opposite the entrance. There, in careful calligraphy, a quote had been painted: "Always know where your seat is, and if they don't offer you one, make your own table." Helen Worthing. Below it, a small brass plaque read simply, "The Helen Worthing Reading Room, where everyone has a place." I stood motionless, unexpected emotion rising in my throat. They had taken my words spoken in a moment of hurt and determination, and transformed them into something healing, something hopeful. Maria tugged at my hand, impatient with adult sentimentality. "Come see my favorite spot. Emily made it just for me." She pulled me toward a small alcove with a beanbag chair and shelves holding books about brave girls and women changing the world. Above it hung a framed photograph of Maria with Arlene, both grinning widely. "See, it's my special place. Emily says everyone needs a spot where they belong." The children streamed in, claiming spaces with the unselfconscious joy of those who haven't yet learned to doubt their welcome. I watched as Emily helped a small boy select a book, as Christopher organized a line for lemonade and cookies, as Arlene settled into the rocking chair surrounded by eager listeners. Loretta appeared beside me, observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. "You know what's remarkable? Most donors want their name on things to be remembered. You never asked for that. Yet here you are, woven into the fabric of this place more permanently than any plaque could manage." I watched as a young mother tentatively entered with an infant, her eyes widening at the unexpected beauty of the space. Emily immediately moved to welcome her, showing her a nursing chair tucked discreetly in a sunny corner. "It's not about being remembered," I told Loretta. "It's about being recognized while you're still here." Later, as the celebration continued, I slipped away to the bathroom for a moment of quiet. When I emerged, I found Emily waiting in the hallway, her expression thoughtful. "I wanted to show you something privately," she said, guiding me toward a small office. Inside, spread across a desk, were architectural plans, familiar yet different. "We're donating the Penthouse," Emily said without preamble, "to the Helen Arlene Foundation for transitional housing for women getting back on their feet." I stared at the plans, trying to absorb this unexpected revelation. The luxurious space had been reimagined as 6 separate apartments, each with its own bathroom and small kitchen. A common area occupied what would have been the grand living room. "But you love that penthouse," I managed. Emily's smile held no regret. "I love what it taught me more." She touched the blueprint gently. "Christopher and I will keep the small guest apartment on the west side. Enough space for weekend visits, for Lily to have her reading nook. But the rest," she looked up, her eyes clear and certain, "the rest can serve a greater purpose." I studied the woman before me, so different from the one who had once dismissed my gift with a careless post-it note. The designer clothes and perfect makeup had given way to practical comfort, but the real change was in her eyes, no longer calculating advantage, but considering contribution. "You don't need my permission," I said softly. "No," Emily agreed, "but I want your partnership, your wisdom. The foundation needs a board chairperson who understands both worlds, the penthouse view and the shelter perspective." She held my gaze. "It should be you." Before I could respond, a commotion erupted from the reading room, laughter and applause. We returned to find Lily standing on a chair, having just finished reading a story to the assembled children, taking an elaborate bow as Christopher pretended to throw roses at her feet. The scene blurred before me, past and future converging in an unexpected present. This wasn't the family gathering I had imagined all those months ago when I sat alone at table 19. It was something messier, more authentic, and infinitely more valuable. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the lights of the city emerge as darkness fell. The air carried the promise of flowers, of renewal. I held two name tags in my hand, Afterthought and Helen Mother, studying them in the fading light. After a moment, I reached for a small box I kept on the balcony table. Inside were matches, a candle, and a small metal bowl Harold had brought back from a trip to Japan years ago. I placed the afterthought tag in the bowl, struck a match, and watched as the flame caught the corner of the paper. It wasn't about forgetting or erasing the hurt. It was about choosing which stories to carry forward and which to release back into the universe, transformed. As the tag curled into ash, I thought of Harold's favorite quote from the architect Louis Kahn: "Even a brick wants to be something more than it is." We all do. Want to be something more than we are, more than others label us, more than our worst moments or greatest triumphs. I kept the second tag, tucking it into my journal. Some names we carry with us, not because they define us completely, but because they remind us of journeys taken, battles won, peace hard-earned. 3 weeks later, on a brilliant May morning, I signed the papers establishing the Helen Arlene Foundation. The legal language was complex, but the purpose was simple: to create spaces where dignity could flourish, where worth wasn't determined by wealth or status, but by the simple fact of being human. Ava prepared the documents with her usual precision, but I noticed a new warmth in her usually professional demeanor. "This is exceptional work, Mrs. Worthing. Truly visionary." We sat in her downtown office, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the park where I now walked each morning. "Not visionary," I corrected gently. "Just necessary." "The first residents can move in by September," Ava continued, organizing the signed papers into folders. "The renovation team is ahead of schedule. Emily's design expertise has proven invaluable. She's found ways to make luxury materials stretch further than anyone expected." I smiled at the unexpected pride in Ava's voice. Even my no-nonsense attorney had been drawn into the project's gravity. "And Christopher's financial literacy program will be available to all residents," Ava added, "along with career counseling, childcare, and legal support." She hesitated, then added, "My firm has committed to providing pro bono legal services for the first 3 years." The news surprised me. Ava's firm specialized in high-end real estate and trust law, not social services. "That's incredibly generous." She met my eyes directly. "Your son reminded us that generosity isn't charity. It's justice in action." A slight smile. "He can be quite persuasive when he believes in something." As I left her office, I found myself walking toward Langston Tower instead of home. The doorman recognized me immediately, nodding with respect as I entered the marble lobby. "Mrs. Worthing, they're expecting you on 57. The private elevator whispered upward, delivering me to the penthouse that would soon welcome women whose lives had been upended by circumstance, violence, or simply bad luck. The space was in transition, workers carefully transforming opulence into practical beauty without sacrificing dignity. Emily stood in what would become the common area, reviewing plans with a contractor. When she saw me, her face brightened. "Perfect timing! We're just deciding on the community kitchen finishes." I joined them, offering opinions on materials that would withstand daily use while still conveying value and care. The contractor listened attentively, making notes and occasionally suggesting alternatives that would better serve the residents' needs. As we toured the nearly completed apartments, I was struck by the thoughtfulness evident in every detail. Each unit featured built-in storage solutions. Furnishings were both beautiful and durable. Windows were dressed with blinds that offered privacy without sacrificing light. "We're incorporating elements from Harold's designs in each apartment," Emily explained, showing me clever space-saving features that echoed his early work. "His philosophy about creating homes, not just housing, guides everything we're doing." In what would become the foundation's modest administrative office, Christopher was installing bookshelves, his sleeves rolled up, forearms dusty with sawdust. "Mom, come see what we salvaged from the old library demolition downtown." He proudly displayed vintage oak shelving that had been carefully restored. Dad always admired this library, said it was built by craftsmen who cared about future readers they'd never meet. He ran his hand along the polished wood. Seemed fitting to give it new life here. As the afternoon progressed, Arlene arrived with Maria in tow. The girl immediately began inspecting the construction, offering serious opinions on paint colors and furniture placement that had the contractors hiding smiles. Arlene sidled up beside me as we watched Maria demonstrate to Christopher how a particular corner should become a reading nook. "Never thought I'd set foot in a place like this," she admitted. "Always seemed like these towers were built to keep people like me out." "They often were," I acknowledged. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's what makes this special, I suppose. Taking something exclusive and making it inclusive without losing its dignity." She glanced at me. "Kind of like what you did with us at the shelter. You didn't come in pitying or patronizing. You just opened doors that were always meant to be open." The observation touched something deep within me. I think we all need doors open sometimes. Arlene smiled, the afternoon light catching the silver in her hair. "And sometimes we need to be the ones holding them." As evening approached, Emily called everyone to gather in the main living area. Workers, volunteers, and family formed a circle in the space that would soon welcome women starting new chapters. "Before we end for today, we wanted to share something special," Emily announced. She nodded to Christopher, who unveiled a simple wooden plaque that would hang in the entrance. "The Langston Haven," it read, "founded in memory of Harold Worthing, who believed everyone deserves a place to stand tall." And beneath were the words that had once seemed impossible. "Established by Christopher and Emily Worthing, under the guidance of Vesper Helen Worthing." The recognition caught me off guard, not because I craved it, but because it acknowledged a truth that had nearly been lost. That families are built not just through celebration and success, but through conflict and reconciliation, through the hard work of seeing one another clearly. We ended the day sharing pizza on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the city in gold and pink. Workers and volunteers mingled with family, boundaries blurring in the shared purpose of creating something meaningful. Lily curled beside me on a bench, her head resting against my shoulder. "Grandma, is this our new house?" I smoothed her hair gently. "Not exactly. This will be a home for people who need a safe place while they build something new." She considered this seriously. "Like when you build a sand castle and the waves come and you have to start over?" "Something like that," I agreed. She nodded, satisfied with the explanation. "Then it's a good thing they'll have a nice place to build from." She looked up at me, her eyes holding the simple wisdom of childhood. "That's what you did for Mom and Dad, isn't it? Gave them a better place to build from?" "Out of the mouths of babes." I hugged her close, marveling at how clearly children can sometimes see what adults struggle to articulate. "I hope so, sweet girl. I hope so." And as darkness fell, lights began to appear across the city, thousands of windows illuminating thousands of stories unfolding simultaneously. I thought about all the tables where people were gathering, all the seats being offered or denied, all the names being spoken with love or indifference. One small light in that vast constellation was ours, imperfect, evolving, but burning with renewed purpose. Not because we had found perfect resolution or erased all hurts, but because we had chosen to see one another, really see each other, beyond labels and expectations, beyond afterthoughts and inherited assumptions. Maria skipped over, interrupting my reflection. "Miss Helen, Mom says I can help decorate the children's room here too. Can I make the sign for the door?" Arlene approached behind her, smiling apologetically. "She's full of ideas, this one." "Of course you can," I told Maria. "What will your sign say?" She thought for a moment, her face scrunched in concentration. Then her expression cleared. "It will say, 'Everyone gets a name,' because that's important, right? That's what you taught us." The simple truth of her words washed over me. Yes, that was it exactly. Everyone gets a name, not a label, not a judgment, not an afterthought, but a true name that honors their full humanity. As the gathering wound down and people began to disperse, Emily paused beside me at the elevator. "Sometimes I think about that wedding day," she said quietly. "How differently everything could have gone if we just—" "No," I interrupted gently. We can't know other paths. We can only walk the one that brought us here." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And where we are now, it's better than where we were heading, isn't it?" I thought of the penthouse transforming into a haven, of Christopher building shelves with his hands, of Arlene and Maria becoming family in ways no blood relation could define. I thought of my own journey from silent acceptance to voiced truth, from afterthought to architect of change. "Yes," I said with certainty, "it's exactly where we need to be." Later that night, in the quiet of my apartment, I opened Harold's old journal, the one he kept during the early years of his career. I found the entry I was looking for, dated just after Christopher's birth. "Watched Vesper today, holding our son by the window. Light all around them. Thought about how we build our lives, not just with grand gestures or perfect moments, but in the small daily choices to see one another, to make room, to honor the space between what is and what could be. That's where love lives, not in the finished structure, but in the constant, careful building." I closed the journal, running my fingers over its worn cover. Harold had understood something I was only now fully grasping: that true legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build forward. Not a monument to your own importance, but a foundation for others to stand on, to build upon, to transform according to needs you might never have imagined. The name tag on my desk, Helen Mother, caught the lamplight. Simple, true, but no longer the whole story. I picked up a pen and a blank card, writing carefully, "Vesper Helen Worthing, builder," because that's what I had become, what we all were becoming, builders of something larger than ourselves, more lasting than hurt, more true than any label hastily applied and thoughtlessly given. Outside my window, the city continued its nighttime symphony. Somewhere in that urban expanse, a woman might be sitting alone at a wedding, feeling invisible. Somewhere else, another might be finding her voice after years of silence. And in September, 6 women would enter a penthouse with keys of their own, ready to build new stories from the ground up. They would never know my name or the strange path that led to their opportunity, but they would feel the intention in the spaces created for them, the dignity in the details, the respect in the design, the love in the light streaming through windows positioned to catch the morning sun. And perhaps that's the finest legacy of all, not to be remembered, but to be continued, not to be named, but to create spaces where others can reclaim their names, not to be seen, but to teach others how to truly see.